The hem of her wedding dress was already stained with mud, but Lady Genevieve didn't care. She had one chance to escape the cold, brutal man her father had sold her to, the Duke of Rothaven. Her maid, Bessie, had sworn the south carriage would be empty, a silent promise of freedom. Heart pounding, Genevieve wrenched open the heavy door, her breath catching in her throat. She was too late. A figure sat in the shadows, and a low, cold voice cut through the darkness. "Going somewhere, Lady Genevieve. The wedding is at noon. It would be unfortunate if you were late." The silk of the wedding dress felt like a shroud. Lady Genevieve Ashford had spent the morning being laced into the suffocating garment, a sacrificial lamb being prepared for slaughter. Her mother, a woman worn down to a whisper by her husband's rages, had simply wept silently in the corner, offering no comfort. Her father, Lord Ashford, had made his terms clear. This marriage to Alistair, the Duke of Rothaven, was not a request. It was a command. It was the only thing saving their name from utter ruin, the final chip in her father's desperate gamble to save their Mayfair townhouse from his creditors. Genevieve had pleaded. She had wept. She had even invoked the name of Thomas, the handsome stablemaster's son, with whom she had exchanged whispered promises in the moonlight. Her father had laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Thomas, you think your childish infatuation matters? You are marrying the Duke. You will give him an heir, and you will secure our future. That is your duty." But Genevieve had one last, desperate plan. Her maid, Bessie, her loyalty bought with the last of Genevieve's personal allowance and the promise of more, had arranged it. A carriage, ostensibly to carry extra luggage, was waiting by the south gate. The driver had been paid to look the other way for 10 minutes. 10 minutes was all she needed to get clear of the estate, trade her dress for peasant clothes Bessie had hidden inside, and make for the coast. From there she would find Thomas. She moved through the servants' corridors of Ashford Manor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The house was in chaos, preparations for the wedding feast providing the perfect cover. She didn't dare breathe until she was outside, the damp Kent air hitting her face. She ran, heedless of the fine silk catching on brambles, the mud sucking at her satin shoes. There it was, the carriage, just as Bessie had promised. Relief, so powerful it was dizzying, washed over her. She was going to make it. She was going to be free. She didn't even check the driver's box, just grabbed the handle, pulled the door open, and scrambled inside. The breath left her body in a silent scream. He wasn't at the church. He was here. Alistair, Duke of Rothaven, sat perfectly still in the opposite seat. He was not a large man, but his presence filled the carriage, sucking all the air and hope from it. His reputation preceded him. The Iron Duke, a man who had built a shipping and industry empire from the ruins of his father's gentlemanly pursuits. He was rumored to be cold, ruthless, and utterly unforgiving. He looked at her, his grey eyes sweeping from her dishevelled hair down to the muddy hem of her gown. There was no anger in his expression. There was no surprise. There was only a chilling, quiet assessment. "Going somewhere, Lady Genevieve?" His voice was low, smooth, and laced with an irony that was more terrifying than any shout. Genevieve's mouth was dry. She couldn't speak. She was trapped, a butterfly pinned to a board. "The wedding," he continued, glancing at a silver pocket watch, "is at noon. It would be unfortunate if you were late." How did you?" she stammered, clutching the door frame. "Your maid, Bessie," he said, as if discussing the weather. "A loyal girl. She informed me of your travel plans last night." She felt the £50 I offered for her information was a more secure investment than your vague promises. He gestured to the seat he occupied. She even suggested I wait here to save you the trouble of a long walk. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, rose in her throat. Bessie, her confidant. You, she whispered, shaking. You are a monster. I am a businessman, Lady Genevieve, the Duke corrected her, his voice devoid of emotion. And you are the centerpiece of a transaction. Your father has sold me his shipping routes, his votes in the Lords, and his daughter. I am here to collect my purchase. He leaned forward, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beneath the iron mask. You may attempt to flee again. But know this, I own the roads. I own the ports. I own the magistrates. And I own your father. There is no place on this earth you can run where I will not find you. Now close the door. We are late. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The finality in his tone was absolute. Defeated, her last spark of hope extinguished, Genevieve Ashford pulled the heavy door shut. The click of the latch sounded like a coffin ceiling. The journey to the village church was the longest 20 minutes of Genevieve's life. The carriage, the very one she had prayed would be her escape, was now her prison cell. She sat rigid, staring out the window, refusing to look at him. The silence was a living thing, thick and suffocating, broken only by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. He will not come for you, the Duke said suddenly. Genevieve's head snapped toward him. Who? Thomas, the stable boy. Alistair leaned back against the plush velvet, his gaze analytical. You believe he is waiting for you in Dover. He is not. He is, at this moment, halfway to Liverpool, with £200 of my money in his pocket and a ticket to America. Genevieve's blood ran cold. You're lying. The Iron Duke does not lie, Lady Genevieve. He calculates. Your father, in his desperation, mentioned your little dalliance. He was afraid you'd be foolish. I simply removed the variable. He reached into his coat and produced a small, folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto her lap. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was Thomas's handwriting, a short, brutal note. Genevieve, a life of love in poverty is a fool's dream. The Duke offers me a new start. I am taking it. Do not look for me. T. The paper fluttered from her numb fingers. It wasn't just Bessie. It was Thomas. The man she had loved, the man she was risking everything for, had sold her for £200. The tears she had refused to shed for herself now came, hot and bitter, blurring the passing countryside. She had not been betrayed by her enemy. She had been sold by her father, her maid, and her lover. £50 for the maid, £200 for the lover, the Duke observed coolly. Your father, of course, cost me significantly more. It seems everyone has a price, Lady Genevieve. You will do well to remember that. She said nothing else. There was nothing left to say. The wedding was a mockery. The small village church was empty, save for her weeping mother and her stone-faced father. The Duke had apparently forbidden any society guests, wishing for no witnesses to his transaction. Genevieve walked the aisle on her father's arm, her face pale and void. When the vicar asked who gave this woman, her father's "I do" was sharp, eager. She stood beside Alistair at the altar. He was a statue, his responses crisp and clear. When it was her turn, she hesitated. The silence stretched. She could feel her father's glare. She could feel the Duke's icy stillness beside her. But most of all, she felt the crushing weight of her reality. Thomas was gone. Her home was lost. There was no escape. "I will," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. The Duke's hand was cold as he slid the heavy gold ring onto her finger. It felt less like a ring and more like a shackle. As the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Alistair turned to her. He did not kiss her. He simply lifted her veil, his grey eyes meeting hers. "You are now the Duchess of Rothaven," he stated, as if confirming the details of a shipping manifest. "You will act as such. You will be civil. You will be obedient. And you will be discreet. Do we have an understanding?" Genevieve could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. The man who had bought her, body and soul, now led her from the church. The carriage that awaited them was not the one from the morning. It was a grand, imposing carriage, emblazoned with the Rothaven crest, a hawk clutching a length of iron chain. It was, she thought, hideously appropriate. The journey to the Duke's ancestral home, Rothaven Castle, was conducted in the same oppressive silence as the ride to the church. Genevieve was hollow, a shell of the girl who had tried to run that morning. She had been stripped of her hope, her love, and her freedom. All that remained was a cold, simmering anger. Rothaven Castle was not a home. It was a fortress. It rose from the rugged northern coastline, a monument of grey stone and unforgiving angles, battling the constant assault of the wind and sea. It was, Genevieve thought, a perfect reflection of its master. The staff was assembled in the great hall, a cavernous, cold space dominated by a massive fireplace that offered little warmth. They were led by a housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, a woman who seemed carved from the same stone as the castle. She dipped a curtsy, her eyes as flat and grey as the Duke's. "Your Grace." "Your Grace," she greeted them, her gaze lingering on Genevieve for a fraction of a second, registering the muddy, ruined wedding dress with a flicker of disapproval. "Mrs. Croft," the Duke acknowledged. "Her Grace will require a bath and a new wardrobe. See to it. She will be quartered in the East Wing." A murmur went through the staff. Genevieve didn't understand its significance, but Mrs. Croft's eyebrows shot up. "The East Wing, Your Grace. But that is the Duchess's traditional—" "The East Wing," he repeated, his voice cutting off her protest. "My study is, as always, not to be disturbed. I will take dinner there tonight. Alone." He didn't spare Genevieve another glance. He simply turned on his heel and strode away, his boots echoing on the marble floor, leaving her alone with her new jailer. Mrs. Croft's expression was unreadable. "This way, Your Grace." The East Wing was a world away from the rest of the castle. It was clear no one had lived in these rooms for decades. The furniture was shrouded in dust covers, the air stale. It was, however, palatial. A sitting room, a dressing room, and a vast, cold bedchamber. It was as far from the Duke's own wing, the West Wing, as one could get while remaining in the same building. He wasn't just giving her separate rooms. He was giving her a separate life. A bath was drawn. Maids, silent as ghosts, unpacked the meagre trousseau her father had managed to provide. They laid out a simple grey wool dress, and Genevieve felt a bitter irony. She had shed the white of a bride and donned the grey of a nun, or a prisoner. Later that evening, a young maid named Mary brought her a dinner tray. She was young, barely 16, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Is everything to your liking, Your Grace?" Mary whispered. "It's fine, Mary. Thank you," Genevieve said, the sound of her own voice startling her. "Mary." Why was Mrs. Croft so surprised about the East Wing? Mary paled, looking over her shoulder. "Oh, I shouldn't say, Your Grace. I am your Duchess. You will tell me." The command sounded strange coming from her, but it worked. Mary curtsied nervously. "It's just, The east wing is the Duchess's wing. The master wing is the west wing. The Duke. He has kept the west wing for himself. It means, well, it's what everyone is saying. It's a marriage in name only. Genevieve should have been relieved. The thought of the Duke, of his duties, terrified her. But instead, she felt a profound, stinging humiliation. He hadn't just bought her. He had bought her and stored her in an attic, like a painting he had no intention of hanging. She was interrupted by the door opening. Not a knock. It just opened. The Duke stood there. He had changed into a simple black coat. "Leave us," he said to Mary, who vanished instantly. He walked into the room, his presence making it feel small. He looked at her, at the untouched food. "This is not a marriage of affection, Duchess," he said flatly. "I believe we are clear on that. I have fulfilled my bargain with your father. Your family is solvent. In return, I require one thing from you." Genevieve met his gaze, her anger a small, hard stone in her chest. "And what is that?" "An heir." The word hung in the cold air. "You will provide me with an heir, a son, to continue the Rothaven line. Once that duty is fulfilled, you may live in this wing, or in our London house, or on the moon, for all I care. You will have your allowance, your title, and your freedom. But until I have a son, you are mine." He stepped closer, and she instinctively recoiled. "Do not mistake my disinterest for weakness, Genevieve. I will not be made a fool of. You will not entertain lovers. You will not disgrace my name, and you will not run. In return, I will be civil, and I will not demand your presence more than is strictly necessary to achieve our goal." He looked at her, his face a cold mask. "I will send for you when I am ready. Good night." He left. The door clicked shut, and Genevieve was alone. A prisoner, a brood mare, the Duchess of Rothaven. She walked to the vast window and looked out. There was no escape. The sea crashed against the cliffs below, a roaring, final answer to her last, dying ember of hope. The first weeks at Rothaven Castle settled into a suffocating routine. Genevieve was a ghost in her own life. She ate her meals alone in the East Wing. She walked the cold, windy battlements alone. The servants were polite but distant, clearly taking their cue from their master. They were Mrs. Croft's people, and Mrs. Croft was the Duke's. Of the Duke himself, she saw almost nothing. He remained cloistered in the West Wing, in his study, managing his vast empire. She heard the comings and goings of couriers, the talk of shipping manifests and factory outputs, but the man remained an enigma. He had not sent for her. The cold, humiliating threat of providing an heir remained just that, a threat hanging over her head. Her anger at him was a constant, simmering fire, but it was now matched by the bitter dregs of her disillusionment. The betrayal of Thomas and Bessie had hurt more than the Duke's cruelty. The Duke was an open enemy. They had been her friends. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive silence of her rooms, Genevieve found the castle library. It was the only warm room in the place, lined with dark wood and thousands of books. She lost herself there for hours, a small comfort. As she was pulling out a volume of poetry, a piece of paper fluttered from between the pages. It was a letter, but the handwriting was not old. It was crisp, modern, and it was addressed to her. "Your Grace, I hope this finds you well in your new prison. I imagine the Iron Duke is a cold comfort on a long night. Does he know what a passionate fire his new Duchess truly has?" Genevieve's blood froze. She knew the handwriting. It was Thomas. "I am not in America. I am in York. £200, it turns out, does not last as long as one might hope. But I still have something of value. I kept all your letters, my dearest Genevieve. The ones where you call him a brute. The ones where you promise to run away with me. The ones where you describe your dreams for our wedding night. Imagine if the Duke were to read those. Or even better, imagine if they found their way into the London society papers. She sank into a chair, her vision narrowing. This was not possible. I am a simple man. I require £500. Leave it in a satchel at the old posting inn in the village, the one called the Hawk's Perch. Leave it by Friday. If you do not, I will assume you wish for your husband to be entertained by your prose. Yours. Tea bile rose in her throat. This was not a plea. It was not a misunderstanding. It was blackmail. The man she had loved, the man she had wept for, was a common criminal, a scoundrel of the lowest order. She crushed the letter in her fist. Where would she get £500? The Duke had given her no allowance. She was a prisoner with a title. She spent the day in a cold panic. She could tell no one. The servants were his. Mrs. Croft would report it to the Duke in an instant. And what would he do? He had warned her. I will not be made a fool of. This would not just make him a fool, it would make him a laughing stock. His rage would be terrible. Thursday night she was sleepless. She had no money. She had no options. Friday was tomorrow. She was pacing her sitting room at midnight when the door opened. The Duke stood there, still dressed from his day. He looked at her, his grey eyes sweeping over her frantic state. "You are agitated," he stated. "I am tired," she lied. He walked into the room, and for the first time, she felt he was truly looking at her, not just assessing a purchase. "I received a letter today, from a man in York, a Mr. Thomas." Genevieve's heart stopped. "He was foolish," Alistair continued, his voice dangerously soft. "He offered to sell me a packet of letters written by my new Duchess. He thought I would pay handsomely to avoid a scandal. He underestimated my priorities." He reached into his coat. He did not pull out a letter. He pulled out a thick packet, tied with a faded pink ribbon. Her letters. You bought them?" she whispered, horrified that he had read them. "I did not." He tossed the packet onto the table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "I sent 2 of my men to his rented room. They explained to him the legal and physical consequences of attempting to blackmail the Duke of Rothaven. He was convinced to part with the letters for free. He is now on a ship to Australia, a convict ship. He will not be returning." Genevieve stared at the packet. He hadn't read them, or if he had, he gave no sign. You did that for me?" Alistair looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I did that for me, Duchess. I told you, I will not be made a fool of. You are a Rothaven now. Your disgrace is my disgrace, and I do not tolerate disgrace." He turned to the fire. "Your taste in men is appallingly naive. The stable boy was a parasite. You are fortunate you did not succeed in your escape." He walked to the door. "Burn them," he said, gesturing to the packet, "and do not be so foolish again." He left. Genevieve stared at the letters, the physical proof of her own stupidity. She hadn't been saved from a brute by a lover. She had been passed from one villain to another, and the second, it seemed, was infinitely more dangerous and complex than the first. She picked up the packet and, one by one, fed the memories of her old life into the fire, watching them turn to ash. The incident with the letters shifted something in the castle's atmosphere. The Duke's action, while cold and self-serving, had also been protective. He had shielded the Rothaven name, and by extension, he had shielded her. Genevieve, stripped of her last illusion of a past love, found herself adrift. There was no what if with Thomas, There was only the "what now" with the Duke. She began to watch him. Her fear, which had been a sharp, painful thing, slowly transmuted into a dark, wary curiosity. She learned his routines from a distance. He rose before dawn. He worked in his study until noon. He rode out, hard and fast, for 1 hour, regardless of the weather. He returned, worked again, and took his dinner alone. He was a machine, a man of iron will and relentless discipline. But there was one deviation. Late at night, sometimes, she would hear his footsteps in the hall. They didn't go to his own wing. They went to the North Tower, a section of the castle that was kept locked. Mrs. Croft had been explicit. His Grace requires the North Tower to be left undisturbed. It is private. Genevieve, emboldened by a strange, restless energy, decided she had to know. What was in the North Tower? A mistress? A mad relative, as in the novels? One night she heard his familiar, steady tread. She slipped from her room and followed at a distance, her slippers making no sound on the stone. He carried a single candle, casting a long, lonely shadow. He reached the heavy oak door of the tower, produced a key, and disappeared inside. She waited a moment, heart pounding, then crept forward. The door was not fully lated. He had left it ajar. She pushed it open a crack. The tower was a single, circular staircase. She could hear him above. She climbed, holding her breath, until she reached the landing. There was only one room. The door was open. She peered inside. It was not a bedroom. It was a nursery. It was preserved perfectly, as if under glass. A small rocking horse. A bookshelf filled with children's stories. A beautifully carved cradle. And Alistair, the Iron Duke, was standing in the center of the room, his back to her, staring at the cradle. He didn't move for a full minute. Then he reached down and gently, almost imperceptibly, set the cradle rocking. A sound, a half-choked breath, escaped Genevieve's lips. He froze. He turned, his face not cold, not angry, but ravaged by a grief so profound it was terrifying. When he saw her, his expression hardened instantly, the iron mask slamming back into place. "Get out!" His voice was a low growl. I'm sorry. I said, "Get out!" He roared the words, and the force of it sent her stumbling backward. He advanced, his eyes blazing with a pain she could not understand. "This room is not for you. It is not for anyone. You will never come here again. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered, terrified, not of his anger, but of the raw agony beneath it. She fled, running down the stairs and not stopping until she was back in the safety of the East Wing, the door bolted behind her. She did not see him for 3 days. The castle was silent, but she could not get the image out of her head. The Iron Duke, alone in a child's room, rocking an empty cradle. She finally cornered the young maid, Mary, in the library. "Mary, you must tell me. The North Tower. The nursery. Whose was it?" Mary turned white. "Your Grace, I cannot. Mrs. Croft would have me dismissed." "Mrs. Croft will not know," Genevieve insisted, pressing a sovereign, one of the few she had, into the girl's hand. Mary's eyes filled with tears. "It was Lady Charlotte's, Your Grace, the Duke's sister. She was not well, after their parents died. The old Duke was a hard man, and the Duchess, she faded. Lady Charlotte was left to the nurses. She was a frail thing, they say. Delicate." "What happened to her?" Genevieve asked. "She died, Your Grace, right in that room. Some say it was a fever. Others—" Mary dropped her voice to a whisper. "Others say she threw herself from the tower window. She was only 8 years old. The Duke, Alistair, he was 16. He had just come back from school. They say he found her. He locked the room that day, and no one has been inside since, until he came back as the new Duke. Now he just goes to remember. Genevieve sank onto a bench. Alistair, a 16-year-old boy, finding his little sister. His coldness, his obsession with control, his fortress of a castle. It was not malice, it was a shield built by a grieving boy, now worn by a broken man. The revelation of the North Tower changed Genevieve's perception of her husband. She no longer saw him as a simple tyrant. She saw him as a man locked in his own prison, one far older and deeper than hers. She stopped flinching when he entered a room. She stopped seeing his coldness as an attack, and instead saw it as a defense. Their strange, silent truce continued. He had still not sent for her. He seemed to have forgotten his own command for an heir. He was consumed by his work, and, she now knew, by his grief. A month after her arrival, a letter arrived, bearing a crest she did not recognize. It was from a Lord Deverell, announcing his intention to visit. When she mentioned it to Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper's lips thinned into a white line. Lord Deverell is an old associate of the old Duke. His Grace will not be pleased. He was not. When Alistair was informed, Genevieve, who was in the adjoining dining hall, heard a glass slam down so hard she was sure it had shattered. "He will be here for one night," Alistair announced at dinner. It was the first time he had requested her presence for a meal. The air was electric. "He is an unavoidable political necessity. You will be polite. You will be silent. And you will not, under any circumstances, be alone with him." Lord Deverell arrived like a foul wind. He was a large man, overly dressed, with a wet smile and eyes that roamed over Genevieve in a way that made her skin crawl. "So this is the little bird the Iron Duke has snared," Deverell boomed, taking her hand and holding it far too long. "A pretty thing, Rothaven. Far prettier than your usual acquisitions." "Deverell," Alistair said, his voice flat and cold. "Welcome." Dinner was an ordeal. Deverell drank heavily, telling lewd stories and barely concealed insults, all aimed at Alistair's common business sense, his factories, his lack of gentlemanly pursuits. Alistair met each jibe with a wall of icy silence. Deverell turned his attention to Genevieve. "Your father, Lord Ashford, a terrible gambler. Terrible. Heard he almost lost it all. Amazing what a timely marriage can do to solve such problems. You must be very grateful to your husband, eh?" "I am where I am meant to be, Lord Deverell," Genevieve said, her voice shaking slightly. Later, as they were retiring, Deverell cornered her in the hall as Alistair was speaking to a footman. "You're a spirited thing," Deverell slurred, blocking her path. "He'll crush it out of you. The Iron Duke. He breaks everything he touches. You should have been mine. I would have known what to do with a fire like yours." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. Genevieve recoiled as if struck. A hand shot out and clamped onto Deverell's wrist, Alistair's. His grip was so tight, Deverell's face went white, his glass shattering on the floor. "You," Alistair said, his voice a low, vibrating growl, "will remove your hand. Or I will remove your arm." "Just a friendly," Deverell stammered. "Now." Alistair didn't release his grip. He bent Deverell's wrist back until the man gasped in pain. "You will leave, not in the morning. Now, my men will escort you to the boundary of my lands. If you ever set foot on Rothaven property again, you will be shot as a trespasser." "You can't," Deverell sputtered, his drunken bravado gone. "I can," Alistair said, "and I will." He shoved the man back, and two footmen, their faces grim, appeared as if from nowhere and seized Deverell by the arms. They dragged him out. The front door slammed shut. Genevieve was breathing heavily, her back against the wall. Alistair turned to her. His face was still a mask of controlled fury. "Go to your room," he ordered. "Alistair," she began. "Go to your room." She fled. But later that night, she couldn't rest. She went to his study. She knocked. "Enter." He was standing by the window, staring out at the sea. "You were warned not to be alone with him," he said, not turning. He cornered me. "Alistair, why did you do that? Why did you throw him out? It wasn't just for me." He was silent for a long time. "Lord Deverell," he said finally, his voice heavy, "was my father's associate. They gambled. They shared pursuits. Deverell is a man of singular, cruel appetites. He destroys things for pleasure." "I know," she whispered. He turned to face her. The look in his eyes was one she had never seen. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was a cold, tired resolution. "You have been under a misapprehension, Duchess. You believe I married you for your father's shipping contracts. You did." "No," Alistair said. "Your father's contracts are worthless. He'd already mortgaged them twice over. They are not worth the paper they are printed on." Genevieve was stunned. "Then why? Why buy my father's debts? Why me?" "Because your father had one last debt he could not pay. A gambling debt to Lord Deverell. And Deverell, who has a taste for innocence, offered to forgive the debt in exchange for one thing." The blood drained from Genevieve's face. "Me. He was to take possession of you the day after your 18th birthday," Alistair stated, his voice flat. "Your father had already signed the papers. It was a private contract. Binding. I learned of it from one of my father's old solicitors. Lord Ashford was, in effect, selling his daughter into slavery." Genevieve sagged against the doorframe, her legs weak. "I could not let that happen," Alistair said. "Deverell is a monster. He would have broken you. Utterly. I offered to buy the debt. He refused. He wanted you. There was only one thing I could do that would legally supersede his contract. Marriage," she breathed. "Marriage," he confirmed. "I bought your father's entire debt portfolio, everything, on the condition that he break the contract with Deverell and give you to me. He, of course, agreed. He didn't care which man took you, as long as his ledgers were cleared." She stared at him, seeing him for the first time. He hadn't trapped her. He hadn't bought her. He had saved her. "Our marriage," Alistair said, turning back to the window, "was not my first choice. It was, however, the only way to save you from a fate far worse than being tied to me. I am a cold man, Duchess, but I am not a cruel one." The study was utterly silent. The only sounds were the crackle of the low fire in the hearth, the distant muffled roar of the North Sea, and the frantic, echoing thunder of Genevieve's own heart. The world had not just tilted, it had inverted. She stared at Alistair, but she was not seeing him. She was seeing a cascade of fractured memories, now reforming into a new, terrifying and profound truth. She saw the carriage, on her wedding day, his cold, assessing gaze. "I am here to collect my purchase." It was not the threat of an owner. It was the desperate, final move of a rescuer, a man who had to become the monster to save her from a real one. She saw the east wing, the vast, cold, lonely distance he had placed between them. It was not a rejection, it was a quarantine. He had locked her away not to punish her, but to protect her from himself, from the very duties he had publicly claimed to demand. She saw the ruined wedding dress. "I own your father," he had said. He did, but not for profit. He had bought her father's soul, not to possess it, but to prevent it from being sold to the devil himself, to Lord Deverell. "You saved me," she whispered. The words were small, dry, pathetic. They were dust in the face of the hurricane he had deflected from her. She had been running from a rainstorm, furious at the man who had pulled her from the path of a tidal wave. Alistair did not move. He remained by the window, a silhouette against the dark glass, the night his only ally. I saved the Rothaven name from being associated with Deverell's particular brand of sport. It was, as I said, a business decision. A hot, sharp anger lanced through her shock. It was an anger so pure it burned away her fear. She strode toward him, her hands clenched at her sides. "Liar!" she hissed. He turned, startled by her vehemence. "You are a liar, Alistair," she said, her voice shaking with a new, potent force. "You lied about the shipping contracts. You lied about your reasons for this transaction. You stood at the altar, and you lied. You stood in my rooms. You threatened me with a duty for an heir. And you lied. You let me hate you." She was close to him now, close enough to see the flicker in his grey eyes. "You let me live here, in this fortress, believing I was your prisoner. You let me weep for a life that was never mine to have. You let me believe you were a tyrant, a cold, heartless thing. Why the cruelty? Saving me was an act of... But this charade, this was torture." Alistair looked away from her, his jaw working. For the first time, the Iron Duke looked cornered. "Cruelty was not the intent," he said, his voice low, strained. "Distance was." "Distance? You call this distance?" she cried, gesturing to the opulent, cold castle around them. "This is a cage." "It is the only protection I know how to give," he retorted, his voice rising, cracking the iron veneer. "I build walls, Duchess. I buy companies. I calculate risks. I do not comfort. I do not soothe. Deverell was a cancer. I cut him out. But the wound was still there. Yours. And I did not know what to do with it." He began to pace, his movements sharp, restless. "If I had told you the truth, what then? You would have been grateful." He spat the word as if it were poison. "You would have felt indebted. You would have looked at me as your savior. That is just another kind of prison, Genevieve. A prison of obligation. I did not wish to trade one cage for another. Your hatred, it was cleaner. It left you free. It left you untouched by me." Genevieve stared at him, her anger faltering, replaced by a stunning, painful clarity. He was so terrified of his own capacity to control, so certain of his own nature as a brute, that he believed her hatred was a gift he was giving her, a gift of autonomy. "Free?" she whispered, the word hollow. "I was terrified, Alistair. I was alone. I spent every night wondering if this would be the night you would come to the East Wing, to collect on your heir. You speak of cages. You left me in the darkest one of all, my own imagination." The words hit him. He stopped pacing and gripped the back of a heavy chair, his knuckles white. "I would not have," he began, then stopped. He closed his eyes. "That was my own failing, my weakness." "The heir," she said, her voice softening, but still insistent. This was the last piece. She had to understand it all. Was that a tool as well, or was that something else? He did not answer. He was a statue, his back to her. "The North Tower, Alistair," she said, her voice gentle now. He flinched, a small, violent tremor that ran up his spine. "I know about the nursery. I know about your sister. Charlotte." "You have been listening to servants' gossip," he said, his voice rough, thick with an old, cold pain. "I have been trying to understand the man who holds my life in his hands," she countered, walking toward him until she stood just behind him. "I followed you. I saw you. In the nursery. You weren't the Duke. You weren't this Iron Man. You were standing by an empty cradle. You were a brother. And you were grieving." His shoulders hitched. The composure he had maintained for a decade, the fortress he had built, stone by stone, began to crumble. She was... He tried, but his voice broke. "She was let down," Genevieve said, her own eyes filling with tears. "By your father, by the world, and you were just a boy. You couldn't save her." He turned, and the look on his face was one of such profound, raw agony that she instinctively took a step back. The mask was not just gone, it was shattered. This was the man beneath the iron. "My father," he said, his voice a rasp, "was a man like Deverell. He enjoyed breaking things. My mother, she was his first victim. She just faded, became a ghost in her own home. And Charlotte, she was so delicate, like glass. I was at school. I was supposed to be becoming a man. They sent word. A fever. I rode for 2 days. I found her. In that room. It wasn't a fever, Genevieve." He looked away, his shame a palpable thing in the room. She couldn't bear it. The loneliness. His rages. I was too late. I was 16 years old, and I was too late. He finally sank into the chair, his head in his hands. The Rothaven line, the name. It was all I had left of her. My one duty, to make it mean something again. Something strong. Something that protects, not destroys. When I spoke to you of an heir, I was not seeing you. I was seeing a ghost, a duty, a way to fix the past, to give her death a purpose. He looked up, his eyes bleak. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, which is why I never acted upon it. I couldn't be him. I couldn't be my father. The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. Here he was, the complete man, a man so devastated by grief, so warped by his own father's cruelty, that he had turned himself into a weapon of pure, cold logic. He had conquered the world of business, but he was still a 16-year-old boy, standing alone in a locked room, unable to save the one person he loved. Genevieve's last kernel of fear dissolved. It was replaced by a wave of empathy, so powerful, so fierce, it felt like a calling. She walked to him, not in supplication, but as an equal. She knelt before his chair. "You are right," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You are not a man built for comfort. You are a man built for war. You've been fighting your entire life, against your father, against his reputation, against Deverell, against your own grief." He looked at her, his expression lost, uncomprehending. "But Alistair," she said, her voice softening, "the war is over. You won. Deverell is gone. Your father is gone. You've built a new world. But you are still standing on the battlements, armed for a fight, and the fortress is empty. There is no one here but us." She reached out, her hand trembling only slightly, and placed it on his forearm. His coat was rigid, but beneath it, she could feel the bunched, tense muscle. "I am not that girl from Ashford Manor," she said, meeting his gaze. She was a fool. She believed in fairy tales and stupid stable boys. She's gone. You saved me from Lord Deverell, Alistair. You saved me from a fate I cannot even bear to imagine. Now, who is going to save you? Who is going to save you from yourself?" He stared at her, as if she were speaking a language he had never heard. "You don't have to be the Iron Duke in your own home," she whispered. "You don't have to be alone in that tower. Let me be your ally, not your prisoner, not your duchess, a title on a piece of paper. Let me be your partner, your friend." Friend. The word hung between them, more intimate than any kiss. He looked down at her hand on his arm. It was the first voluntary, kind, human touch he had permitted himself in. He couldn't remember how long. He was a man drowning, and she was not just offering him a rope, she was offering to swim beside him. Slowly, as if moving a limb that had long been asleep, he covered her hand with his own. His skin was warm, not cold. It had never been cold. It had just been still. "I do not know how," he whispered. It was the most honest, devastating confession he had ever made. The Iron Duke, the master of industry, did not know how to be a person. "Neither do I," Genevieve admitted, a small, watery smile touching her lips. "I've spent my life being a daughter, a pawn, a prisoner. I don't know how to be an ally. But we can learn. Together." He let out a breath, a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to release a decade of tension from his shoulders. He looked past her, toward the grand window. The first, faint, grey-blue light of morning was beginning to pale the sky. A new day. "The gardens," he said, his voice still rough, but different. "Lighter. My mother. She loved the roses. Mrs. Croft still maintains the garden. I have not walked there since before," Genevieve finished for him, understanding perfectly. "Yes, since before." He turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time, his grey eyes were not iron. They were just grey, clear, and very, very tired. "They say they are quite remarkable in the morning." She rose from her knees, her hand still linked with his. "I would like that very much." It was not a fairy tale. There was no sudden declaration of love, no grand, cinematic kiss. It was something more fragile and infinitely more real. He stood, but he did not release her hand. He held it for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement. A new contract, written not in ink and threats, but in shared pain and a hesitant hope. Then he released her hand, only to straighten, turning his arm and offering her his elbow. It was not a command to be led. It was an invitation. "Genevieve," he said, and hearing her name, not her title, spoken in this new, quiet voice, made her heart ache with a strange new feeling. It was not love, not yet, but it was the fertile ground from which it might grow. "Alistair," she replied. She took his arm, and together, the Duke and Duchess of Rothaven, two strangers bound by a dark secret and a shared, broken past, walked out of the study's shadows and toward the first light of morning. That's the story of Genevieve and the Iron Duke. It wasn't the escape she planned, but in the end, she found a different kind of freedom. She thought she was running from a monster, only to find she had been saved by a man who was just as trapped as she was. Their story was not one of love at first sight, but of something stronger. Two broken people finding an ally, a partner, and a chance to heal in the most unexpected place. If you were on the edge of your seat, wondering what would happen next, please let me know. These real-life dramas are so powerful. Hit that like button if you believe Genevieve found her true strength, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of hidden truths and incredible twists. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a story where nothing is as it seems, and tell me in the comments, did you suspect the Duke's real secret?